everyone. The leadership of the African National Congress, the membership of the African National Congress, our guests who will be speaking today. Our greetings. Also, I see also members of the media, and we want to thank them for actually also tuning in and for covering this. And our greetings to the broader South African public for yet again showing an interest in the discussions of the African National Congress, discussions that are meant to revive the African National Congress as a leader of society, because the ANC's revival speaks to society's revival in South Africa, and also in the African continent and the global South. So we thank you for your presence. Comrades, critical engagement and discussion has always been a cornerstone of the culture of the African National Congress since its very inception. And also in the mass democratic movement and in the Youth League of the ANC. And this is what has kept our movement alive during the most challenging of times. Yes, critical discussion at times has been translated into conflict at certain periods in time, but in the end, it is what has pulled us through. I therefore welcome you in this particular context to the third of a number of roundtable discussions, Umrabulo roundtable discussions convened specifically for the purpose of encouraging broader public discussion amongst branches of the ANC and activists of the ANC around the ANC National General Council discussion documents. For the African National Congress, the NGC is a forum wherein which the branches of the ANC and its structures assess the progress that we have made since the conference of the African National Congress. And these discussion documents lay a basis for those particular discussions and that assessment and the charting of a way forward. To encourage and enrich critical thought and solutions, inputs are often made in these forums that we'll be hosting by comrades of the ANC, so as to lay a basis for discussion that is basically intended to continue beyond today's session, culminating into resolutions at our NGC and culminating into discussions beyond that, going into the next national conference of the African National Congress. This specific Umrabulo roundtable today, comrades, focuses on the discussion document that is entitled Youth. So just to re-emphasize, this is an ANC discussion document, comrades. And the nature of the panel is comrades of different generations who have led in the youth movement and who are still leading in the youth movement. It's a panel comprising, as we said, of serving and past youth leaders, and it's been constituted with the objective of contrasting lessons learned against present day and lived experiences. Most importantly, comrades, through this Umrabulo roundtable, the intention is to lay an initial basis for a discussion that should continue up to the NGC and beyond, as we said, and also inside of the branches of the African National Congress. Comrades, these discussions are held via Zoom and are also shared on the Facebook pages of the ANC and of the ANC School of Leadership, the OR Tambo School of Leadership. And just to also emphasize to comrades that this will not just be a monologue or a dialogue between the panelists, because it is a culture of the ANC to encourage debate, to encourage constructive discussion. So after the panelists have spoken, we'll be having two discussants who will be interrogating the views of the panelists, and thereafter the viewers will then also be able to basically interact and to pose questions, comrades. So in that context, let me welcome yet again our panel. And I'm going to introduce each panelist as they speak. I'm not going to introduce them all right now, comrades. So the first of our panelists is a comrade that whose growth we have seen in the youth movement, coming from the Peter Mokaba region in the Limpopo province. He's a member of a branch. Uh, he's a member of a branch of the African National Congress in the Peter Mokaba region in Limpopo province. Also, the former regional task team member of the ANC Youth League in Peter Mokaba, and very importantly, the former president of the South African Student Congress. I'm now going to introduce, I'm now going to call upon Comrade Ngwako Sela Malola to shed some light, to speak to us. As I've understood, is going to speak about the historical role of the ANC Youth League and of the youth in the ANC that they played in the history of South Africa's struggle and beyond. Thank you, Comrade Ngwako. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Comrade. Thank you very much, Comrade Chairperson. Good morning, comrades. Good morning, leadership of the UR Tambo School of Leadership and the leadership of the African National Congress, fellow comrades, fellow South Africans. I have been given a bit difficult task, but I will attempt to do my best. On the role of youth in the National Democratic Revolution, I will take it that we all accept that there is no universally acceptable age group referred to youth across boundaries of countries, and that the United Nations defines youth between the age of 14 and 24, and this specifically is done for statistical purposes. For the purpose of today's discussion, we shall focus on the definition of youth as defined by the laws of the modern-day Republic of South Africa. That is, we shall define young people or youth as an age group between childhood and adulthood, that is between 14 and 35. We shall, in an attempt, comrades, to look for an answer whether the youth will be and can be a reliable motive force, or can be a motive force. Attempt to get into, firstly, a definition of the concept of the motive force. So we will, for the purpose of discussions of today, say at least that the motive force is a social grouping and or strata or a class that has capacity to wedge. Those are working with comrades. To wedge, that is the first one. Sustain the process of fundamental social change, that is revolution. The second operating word is sustain, and in order to benefit, this is very important, that it is a grouping that enter consciously, wedge, sustain, and seek to benefit from the proceeds of successful conclusion of a revolutionary process. In this, such a force is usually defined in various, using various demographics. This, in particular, is because of various context of revolutions. In our country, we use, and in the African National Congress, we specifically use the demographics of class, gender, and race in the main to define I shall do that. I shall switch on the line to I hope you can see me. Now, comrades, thank you very much. I was saying that we do that in the country to define the motive forces given our historic realities. But one of the realities that cut across all revolutions is that because the future is designed for the youth, and because it is the youth of today that seeks to secure the future of their children and their offsprings, as blatantly put by Cabral in the famous speech. It is mainly all these social class stratas and groupings. It is mainly the youth that seek to benefit and seek to wage and sustain such a revolution. This is not to say the youth is pitted against all other social stratas and classes. This is to say, however, that the most of the I think the people who are writing comments here are actually disturbing me. That most of these social groupings are defined in their leadership by the demographic of youth, in the leadership of the struggle by the demographic of youth. And that our understanding for the concept of the national democratic revolution is that it is that concept that has its genesis from the Communist International Conference on the discussion of the colonial question, but that for the purpose of this discussion, we shall confine that the definition of the national democratic revolution to South Africa. This means that we are going to gauge the role of the youth historically and currently in relation to the struggle for total liberation of Black people in general and Africans in particular from socio-economic bondages, thereby building a society that is non-racial, non-sexist, democratic, united, and prosperous. So for the purpose of today's discussion, we shall gauge the role of the youth in relation to that. And we dare say that such a society is fundamentally different from the apartheid colonial society in that the apartheid racial colonial society is sexist, or autocratic, and divided on a racial and gender basis is being changed, has been changed to become a non-racial, non-sexist, democratic, and united and prosperous one. Then we attempted to look, comrades, at the evidence that youth have played a role in and are reliable in waging and sustaining revolutions. And why do we come to that conclusion? And we dare say that young people from all over the world have been at the center of social revolutions. If we are to speak about the Cuban Revolution and the overthrow of the Batista regime, or the Libyan Revolution led by Colonel Gaddafi, or the overthrow of of the Portuguese colonial regime by Frelimo in Mozambique or elsewhere in the world, we shall agree that young people have been at the center of such revolutions and often provided leadership in South Africa. And as it relates to the African National Congress, the formation of the African National Congress in 1912 has been largely influenced by a young fellow called Pixley Kaisaka. And this is a qualitative, we regard as a qualitative step towards national liberation. It is this that we call an embryonic stage of national consciousness among Africans. And this embryonic stage of national consciousness among Africans has been the beginning of the victory for national liberation for Africans, in particular, and Black people in general in South Africa. In the 1940s, we have seen the formation of the African National Congress Youth League, and that has campaigned against docile methods that have been used by the ANC against the regime, and adopted a path from peaceful means of protest to armed struggle. But we have also seen that in the 1950s, we have seen a big march of more than 20,000 women to the union buildings on passports. In the front, among the women who were leading was an 18-year-old Sophie de Braille and many other young people. When the liberation movement was banned, it is young people who sustained internal resistance. We can talk about the Soweto uprising of 1976, the Pre-Frelimo rallies of the 1970s, the general strikes, trade boycotts, and all sorts of methods that have been employed against apartheid. We also then mentioned that the international solidarity against apartheid have been mobilized largely by African youth who were schooling outside the country. I guess comrades will also remember the presentation of the African National Congress to the United Nations by a young fellow called Thabo Mbeki at the age of 21 on behalf of President O.R. Tambo, and what that led to at the level of international solidarity front. So it is our intention, comrades, to allege that the 1944 formation of the African National Congress Youth League revolutionized the African National Congress. It is also our intention to allege that the twin task of the African National Congress Youth League, as exposed by its own manifesto, seeks to unite young people behind the banner of the ANC and champion the interest of the youth. In essence, it is our intention to allege that this means that the ANC Youth League shall be Congress of the Youth and the Youth League of the Congress. Inherently, in that is an inherent contradiction that has been able to put the revolution forward. That contradiction is that while a league of the Congress, the youth have sufficient autonomy to discuss, think, and impact on the body politics of the movement. This we see in the relaunching conference of the African National Congress Youth League in 1991. That the African National Congress Youth League also redefined that in as its role in a document called The Life of Its Own. Now, what about the ANC Youth League and the youth today? Young people across the country are being allegedly pathetic. This is something that is being spread by older generations. And some of those generations are generations that have led the youth at their prime time. I dare allege here that young people are not pathetic. That young people are engaged in processes of social revolution wherever they are found. This expression is found in their songs, in arts, in poetry, in the industrial action, in the actions against unjust education system, in the actions against unjust allocation of resources for skills and training, in their actions and fight against unemployment and racialized prosperity. So I dare allege here that as it related to the African National Congress, the problem is not the apathy among the youth, but that it is lack of political leadership to put together the interest of the youth and to synthesize this interest and intentions and actions into a revolutionary program of action, as it was done by the 2011 Galaga Conference of the African National Congress Youth League. So I wanted to allege that the actions of the youth are extremely fragmented, that these are met with resistance from the ruling elite, comprising of established white capital that is seeking to defend its gains by disorganizing the youth for fear of social prosperity programs that have been that are led by that have been largely led by the ANC youth, and that this is done in cahoots with, in particular, old people who have experience in the affairs of the ANC youth and who from time to time want to secure their democratically acquired status of being permanent representatives of youth, or at the times of protecting their statuses in the state and protecting the status quo that sustain their livelihood and well-being. However, this is not amazing. This is not something that is amazing or unique to ourselves. As we all know, older generations will seek to sustain the status quo, while younger generations will seek to create a contradiction sufficient for rupture of a new society. As we wanted to allege and say that there is sufficient evidence that young people can be and have been carriers, have been able to wedge sustain and the process of democratic revolution. However, that the democratic revolution is currently under threat, as those who are in the lead in such a revolution and the energy that is desperately needed for that democratic revolution has been emasculated from the body politics of the African National Congress. This in the main.
As you round up, Comrade Ngwako,
as I round up, that is what I want to allege. I want to say that as an equalizer effect and in an attempt to nurture the skills of the youth, we must ensure that we deploy sufficient skills, develop resources to skills development, arts and culture and education, but that we must allow the youth innovation to break away with the racial past and break away from the modern day slavery that they have been subjected to. Thank you very much, and apologies if I took your time.
Thank you very much, Comrade Ngwako. You have just been within the time. We really thank you for that particular input, and particularly for setting the historical basis for the discussion, but also towards the end, outlining some of the challenges, as well as putting forward some of the solutions. And I think the next presentation by our next panelist, Comrade Ronald Lamola, will actually also speak to some of the issues that you've outlined towards the end, because Comrade Ronald Lamola will be speaking to us about the challenges of the last decade that have faced the youth movement and the youth within Congress. And he'll also be suggesting certain ways forward, and I think he'll be able to speak to that as well. And I've already seen certain questions in the comment box, which do speak to your presentation. So we want to thank you, and we want our listeners to also think of some of the points that were raised there. So our next panelist, comrades, as I've mentioned, is Comrade Ronald Lamola. Comrade Ronald Lamola is not only the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, a young minister, a very, very inspiring public servant who many young people in our society can relate to. He's also the National Executive Committee member of the ANC. He serves on the Working Committee of the ANC, a very senior position in the African National Congress. But the comrade as well, and of particular relevance to this discussion and to the topic that he'll be speaking to, is Comrade Ronald Lamola has led in the youth movement at various levels. He was also the deputy president of the African National Congress Youth League. I mean, I remember being a delegate in that particular Congress in 2011, where we elected him along with a collective. And that particular Congress of the African National Congress Youth League in 2011 resolved on economic freedom in our lifetime and discussed certain resolutions that should be pushed in the ANC regarding aspects of the economy and the ownership pattern. So he represents a generation of youth within the movement that set the tone to a great extent. Comrade Ronald Lamola also at a professional level is a qualified lawyer, having obtained his law degree from the University of Venda in 2005, and then he went further also into postgraduate studies. He also practiced as a lawyer as well, and he also worked in government, at a provincial level before having gone and practiced law and then having gone and become the Minister of Justice. Comrade Lamola has also been discussing various aspects of organizational renewal and also having spoken to the issues around land reform from the very onset when he was first elected as a member of the NEC of the African National Congress. I'm now going to call upon Comrade Ronald Lamola to please speak to us and to engage with the audience. Comrade Lamola, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Comrade Khalid, the Program Director, and all comrades who are in the platform. I'm not sure who is here, but everyone who is here, hopefully it's going to be a robust discussion. And Comrade Mwako, who has just laid the foundation for this discussion, has now made my job easier. I will just start from where he almost ended and state that the ANC Youth League and the youth struggles in the country, as they were shaped through various evolutions of our history, from during the apartheid period and after the unbanning, it also shaped and changed the character of the structure as it moved along. And by 1991, or when it was unbanned, the ANC Youth League, through its relaunch, there were lots of organizations that participated in its relaunch, which is then then SANSCO, PSYCO, the COSAS, and also what was known as the Youth Desk of the ANC that was in exile, that was led by Comrade Jackie Selebi. I'm bringing this, Comrade Khalid, because it is this debate amongst these structures that again brought back the serious debate of how can the Youth League play a role in the ANC and in society as a whole. How should it be structured and how must it be linked and related to the ANC itself? The PSYCO believed that the Youth League must be independent altogether from the ANC because they were already used to them being independent. although they had political guidance from the United Democratic Movement, the UDF at the time, but they were operationally almost independent. But the youth desk from exile that was led by Comrade Jackie Silebi was a youth desk of the ANC, and it was almost like a mouthpiece or just a section that was dealing with youth affairs, of young people that were had to be taken care of in exile and so forth. So they still believed that for the Youth League to survive post unbanning, it must be a youth desk of the ANC. And the SASCO and COSAS, they felt that they still need to continue to be independent for them to be able to represent the aspirations and interests of students, so that while they work within the political guidance of the Freedom Charter and also the influences from the MDM structures, they need to retain their organizational independence. But at the end, conference concluded that SAICO and the youth desk are going to now form the core of the relaunch of the Youth League. And they agreed on the autonomy of the Youth League. And I think Comrade Mwako spoke to that in terms of how they then defined it. But I think it will be beneficial for this gathering to just quote from that extract from the former Wandebele relaunching Congress of the Youth League. I'm quoting this, Comrade Chair, because I believe the autonomy of the Youth League is its lifeblood. They said in that Congress, the youth can only effectively participate in the liberation of our country and get involved in the building of a democratic South Africa on the basis of totality of knowledge and experience handed over to it by older generations. At the same time, young people should not be encouraged to merely to copy or assimilate what is handed over to them. They should do that through an investigative and critical approach. Real education in the struggle on the part of the youth cannot be separated from their independent political involvement. This was the former Wandebele relaunch policy conference. This is how they redefined their role. And a foundation was laid for the autonomy of the Youth League, which helped the generation of Lulu Johnson when they took over from the generation of Peter Mkaba, organizational renewal to proceed. Even during the period of Comrade Malusi Kigaba, they proceeded with the process of realignment, reorganization, and reorganizing the Youth League. And Comrade Mbalula's generation did the same. But they had a different kind of a task, Comrade Kigaba and Bax, because we had also just attained political freedom in 1994. So it meant that the Youth League had to grapple with its own recharacterization of what role is going to play post-1994, that we are now no longer only opposing apartheid, but we now have to shape the role of the Youth League, but we also have to advocate the interests of the youth in the country as a whole, so that they are able to participate in the economy, they are also able to participate in the broader social reconstruction, the RDP of the soul that was admitted at the time. This was not an easy task because they were now a youth league of the ruling party. And when they have to engage, they also had to take that into cognizance in terms of how did they become militant and radical, but also not define themselves outside the discipline of the ANC. We were later also ourselves seized with this kind of a difficult conundrum. I think Comrade Mwako also tried to speak about it, of how then do you characterize yourself as the youth league of the ruling party and play a role as he stated in terms of the twin task, that of advocating the interest of young people and also mobilizing them behind the banner of the ANC, but ensuring that their interests, as he said, they want to benefit, must be catered for. This really led to one of the biggest difficulties when ourselves were the leadership of the Youth League. We said in Galaga in the 24th National Conference, when we redefined the mission of the Youth League. As you will remember, the first mission was through the Youth League Manifesto that was defined by the generation of Mandela, Tambo, and Sisulu when they wanted to attain political freedom. Ourselves then had lessons from the unbanning, the post-1994, that there was no movement in terms of deracializing the economy. There was no movement to reconstruct the South African society for the benefit of the people as a whole, as declared by the Freedom Charter. It was on this background that the Youth League began to develop documents speaking to the core of the means of production of deracializing the economy. And you will remember, Comrade Chairperson, the first one was the nationalization of mines, which led to the boiling point of relations between the Youth League and the leadership of the ANC to be at its highest level of intolerance when the Youth League barged into or stormed into the stage in the NGC in Durban in 2010, when the resolution on the mines, the Youth League believed was not as per the Congress or as per the NGC's outcomes, but it was somewhere not reflecting the true reflections of the discussion. That became the toiling or the highest level of a political indifference between the leadership of the ANC and that of the Youth League. And I think we reached boiling point or a level when the relationship completely collapsed in the Congress of the Youth League in Galaga, the 24th National Congress. In the Galaga 24th National Congress program director, we adopted the program Economic Freedom in Our Lifetime, anchored on 7 cardinal pillars. The first cardinal pillar was expropriation of land without compensation for equitable redistribution of land. I want the meeting to note that. The second one, Chairperson, and it was deliberate, nationalization of mines for nationalization, for industrialization. You should be able to know the difference between expropriation of land without compensation and the nationalization of mines for industrialization. The third one was inclusive and decentralized economic growth and development. The fourth one was land restitution and an agrarian reform. The fifth, building of a strong developmental state and a public service. Massive investment in the development of the African economy. The seventh one was provision of education, skills, and expertise to the people. These cardinal pillars, in my view, they remain relevant to date, obviously with changes that could be brought by the current young people who wants to relaunch the Youth League. But I am bringing this, Chairperson, to illustrate the political program that this generation of the 24th National Congress and the 23rd, and even the generation before then, had laid the foundation to espouse a program that was now beginning to say, we have now attained this political freedom. We must now speak about how we're going to achieve economic freedom. And this economic freedom was anchored on these 7 cardinal pillars. But this Chairperson led to one of the biggest hostilities between the ANC leadership and the leadership of the Youth League, and various pronouncements were made at the time, including the resolution with regards to the bombing of Libya and the death of Muammar Gaddafi, including resolutions with regards to defense, to arms, U.S. armed presence in our neighbors, Botswana. This led to one of the most publicized hostilities at the time between the Youth League and that of the ANC. And I want to state and argue, Chair, that at the time we argued ourselves, even with the leadership of the ANC, that it will be unwise for the ANC to suspend, to expel, or even disband the Youth League structures across the country, because that is going to tame the Youth League and make it a lapdog, a useless toy phone that will not be relevant in the interest of the youth, neither to reproduce ideas for the ANC. One is because we believed that for the Youth League to advance and bring new ideas, it must bring policies that may not be at the time the policies of the ANC. In any way, if you bring a policy of the ANC, it will not be a new idea. For it to be a new idea, it will have not to be an ANC policy. This was a highly contested issue because the ANC said you operate within the integral part of the ANC. You cannot speak what it is not ANC policy. So we argue that there is a difference between what is not ANC policy and what is a new idea, which we believed were bringing on the table, which we also believe was a role of the Youth League, to bring new ideas, to reshape the ANC as it has always been shaped by previous generations of the Youth League, so that the ANC renew itself, but also it drives the program for social change with new vigor and new militants. And I must also admit, Chairperson, that we also committed mistakes ourselves. And where I think we committed mistakes is when, for example, when the leadership of the ANC called us to order. At some point, we will still continue with the particular point and still argue in public. And where the ANC leadership has spoken on a particular matter, we will still continue to contradict the leadership of the ANC. I believe we could have found a way of engaging these matters internally, particularly where we've been publicly called to order or where the ANC has spoken in public on a particular matter. But I also think that the ANC has also made a mistake in that at all material times, it should seek to guide the Youth League, not to put a sledgehammer approach amongst young people, because that will deny the youth an opportunity to be innovative, to be creative, but also to bring new ideas. A scared young person will never bring any new idea on the table, because the only way you can bring innovations and new ideas is when you are free to think and you are free to express your views and opinions. But when you are scared, you are restrained from expressing your opinions and also from bringing some new ideas on the table, because it might rot ill discipline, or it might bring some kind of a label on your hands. So I think this is a debate that is needed within the structures of the ANC, firstly, and also of the Youth League. How do we now want to define the autonomy of the Youth League post all this that we now know since 1994 and now in the 21st century? Because this, as you read one of the writings of one of the four runners of the four writers of the ANC, Dumanogwe, who had the privilege of being both the Secretary General of the Youth League and also the Secretary General of the ANC, he remarked that the sharp criticism of ANC policies from the Youth League resulted in a lack of harmony, suspicion, and sometimes open hostility between Congress leaders and the youth leaders. Nogwe further observed that ANC leaders regarded the youth leaguers as upstarts who wanted to usurp their positions. On the other hand, youth leaguers in many cases despised the old established leadership of the ANC. Because of this attitude, not a single ANC league branch was established at the insistence of the ANC at that time. That was just prior to the 1949 program of action. Nogwe further wrote that the fundamental objects of the youth movement must necessarily be the same as the fundamental purpose of must not necessarily be the same as the fundamental purpose of the Congress. This cannot be otherwise, since the youth suffer the same oppression as the people of South Africa. However, because the peculiar characteristics, needs, and interests of the youth and the youth movement cannot merely be those of junior congresses. So you will see that this hostility and difficulties between the leadership of the Youth League and that of the ANC did not start with our generation. It started even from since its formation. There was that kind of suspicions and some kind of views that the Youth League must be a junior congress to the ANC. We argued ourselves during our time, Comrade Khalid, that if you have the Youth League that behaves and talk the same way as the ANC, therefore there is no need for the ANC. We must all just go and join the ANC in the branches and participate as members of the ANC, because there is no relevancy of us behaving the same way and conducting ourselves the same way as that of the ANC, because we have got a peculiar kind of interest that we are serving, which is the young people, which Comrade Mwaka has already defined as a strata within society. So if you are representing a strata, there are particular characteristics that you need to espouse and interests that you need to defend. So I think going
as you wrap up leadership.
Thank you, Comrade Party. I think as as we go forward, those are the issues that will need to be clarified in terms of the role of the Youth League and its members, both in the ANC and in society. And this must be clearly defined so that even those that will end up helping us to relaunch the Youth League of the ANC, they operate and work without fear because they will know what is their role and it is clearly defined. So that their role, they will know that one day they will not be suspended, expelled, or even disbanded for expressing a view that emanated from a Congress or from structures of the ANC Youth League across the country. And I want to argue that that will only happen if we allow the freedom of giving the autonomy of the Youth League, because that is its lifeblood. Without the autonomy, the Youth League will be moribund, it will be a useless toy phone, it will not take us anywhere. And it is for that reason that ourselves as current leaders of the ANC, we fully agree that the Youth League must be allowed to be run by people who are under the age of 35. And even its Congress must be convened by those that are under the age of 35, because that means that you are defining and giving the youth their own organization to define it. But the ANC will play its role as a guiding part in terms of the constitution, which is an integral part of the ANC. So that is my view up to now, Comrade Khalid, and I hope it will help shape the debate going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Comrade DP, for that particular input. Took us down memory lane, but also more importantly, really spoke to some of the burning issues that have been in the minds of members of the ANC Youth League lately. And it actually linked the issue of the, how do we say, the challenges in the organization of the Youth League, the issues around the autonomy, linked it to the broader struggles around ownership patterns in our economy. It's very interesting because this debate has actually, basically been taking hold in South African society around what do we do around the ownership patterns, but how the Youth League autonomy, in your view, was actually cut and suppressed when it started to speak around certain issues of the economy. So it shows that our political development, and particularly as the youth movement, is not divorced from the development of the economy and from the economic realities and from our views around the economy. But some really, really pertinent questions raised. And I'm hoping that as we get into the terrain of rebuilding of the ANC Youth League that is going to be led by young people, it will be young people that will actually be having these discussions. And these kind of discussions will lay the basis also for the rebuilding of the Youth League, and not only restricted to National General Council discussions of the African National Congress. We thank you, Comrade DP, yet again for your input, leadership. The next panelist comes from a different generation as the previous two speakers, and I think she represents the current youth, a younger generation. Comrade Fasia Hassan is not only the youngest member of the provincial legislature deployed by the African National Congress in Gauteng at the moment. She's also somebody who came from the Fees Must Fall generation when she was at Wits University. She was the first woman chairperson of the Muslim Students Association. She was part of SASCO. She was part of the South African Students Union, SAUS. She was Secretary General of the Wits University Student Representative Council, where from 2014 to 2015, where she was part of the Fees Must Fall campaign, a very historic moment in the history of youth struggle in this country. Comrade Fasia is also a member. She's part of the rebuilding of the Youth League in Greater Johannesburg, as she's a member of the RTT of the ANC Youth League. She's also chairperson of the branch of the ANC Youth League in Ward 58 in Johannesburg, Zone 6. She's also a member of the Young Women's Desk of the African National Congress Women's League. and where she heads the subcommittee on social relief. So I'm going to hand over now to this young leader, Comrade Fassia, to speak to us. And the conversation that Comrade Fassia will be having with us is to speak also about some of the challenges that young people are facing, but particularly the challenges that are outlined in the Umrabulo NGC document. So she'll be speaking more directly to the document, and she'll also be proposing some of the solutions. Thank you very much. Comrade Fassia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Comrade Chairperson, and thank you to the Roundtable School of Leadership and, of course, the ANC. If I have any difficulties with my audio, I'm happy for you, Comrades, just or Chairperson, to interrupt me and make sure I'm still audible. I'm going to be sharing my screen. I should be able to do that. There we go. I'm going to be sharing my screen with a short presentation that's been created for the actual NGC document. Just can I confirm that you, comrades, can see it in front of you?
Yes, we see it. We see it.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, comrades. I'm going to quickly just start by saying, nobody is the vanguard of youth issues or any of the things that I'm going to be putting forward. They're really just ideas and thoughts, and they're really just meant to spark some debate and ideas. But by no means am I the vanguard or the ultimate truths of what I'm going to be saying. So I wanted to start with that. We know the majority of the population is young. We know that, of course, the future of the ANC really depends on our ability to adapt and recreate ourselves around young people. But more importantly, that the ANC needs to be at the center of youth struggles. So I'm going to be covering some of the highlights of the paper. I'm not going to be able to cover everything because of time, but everyone can read the document online. So I'm just going to pick and choose a few things that I think are important. The first big takeaway and first big thing is that youth were not a homogenous group. A lot of people just say youth and then think, well, okay, we've covered it. When in reality, the South African youth population is incredibly varied due to class, race, gender, education level, rural versus urban, political exposure, access to the economy, you name it, it's how it defines us and varies amongst young people. And that means different contexts, different experiences, and therefore different approaches. So this idea of we'll solve youth unemployment or the crisis of youth access to the economy with one policy is not really going to work. And we've seen that, right? And I also want us to critique and think very deeply about this thing of youth as a chunk. I think we need to critique it because we know that young people are very varied. I'm going to go very quickly through this. Most of the people on this call are in fact young. The point of this slide was to really dissect or make a little bit more understandable of young people. We've seen this rise of woke politics, intersectionality, cancel culture, but a lot of us will know a lot about that. And I think time is a bit of a problem, but this is all in the paper, so it can be read up in detail there. Of course, identity politics, none of us can run away from it. Most of us would have been born post-apartheid like myself, but of course still very much identify within these ideas of identity politics and identify as those different groupings as opposed to young South Africans in general. Those racial disparities we know are inherently linked to the access of resources and opportunities. We've also seen a very big trend of the rejection of the Rainbow Nation concept and that hollowing out of the idea of non-racialism. So we really need to rethink the idea of a rainbow nation, but more importantly, we have to have honest conversations around it. And part of this idea of the rejection of this notion comes from the fact that we may have achieved political freedom, yes, but we've not achieved economic equality. And Comrade Lamola and Comrade Ngwako spoke about this, that we still don't have access to the economy. We're still fighting for economic access and economic freedom. And those are some of the really big issues. And of course, economic issues, they put food on the table, right? And that makes it a very tangible issue for people. The rejection of these notions we know are born from that anger and disillusion from the system, especially by young people. And I agree with Comrade Ngwako that young people are not apathetic per se. The problem here is that a lot of young people just feel failed by the system and feel like they're not listened to. And this paper also covers that. We also see the polarization of young people. I think we know that. But this is an important point, the next one. Young people who do not identify with the traditional forms of politics or democracy. And that's a very big trend, not just in South Africa, but across the world. The feeling that political parties have failed them, the feeling that public representatives have failed them, the feeling that really there is no system that represents young people truly. And that's a really big thing that I think we need to unpack and be quite open and honest about. We also know that as young people, we didn't live through apartheid, and there's no automatic loyalty to the liberation struggle. And this is very important. While it's respected, it's not enough for political parties and for leadership to say, right, we were the Liberation Party. We really need to go beyond that. And young people are showing that as well. The rise of young Black radical feminists who organize. We're seeing this around gender-based violence, around femicide. And I think this is very important also in terms of understanding young people. This is very important as well, understanding that youth issues, or young people rather, are very clear on the issues that affect us, and we have very strong ideas on how to solve them. So this idea of talking at young people as opposed to speaking with young people is a huge issue. The idea that solutions are going to come externally, it needs to be rejected, and in fact is being rejected. So this approach of us being told of what's good for us is never going to be the good or the right approach from the older generation. We don't feel listened to, and we don't feel like we play a meaningful role in the decision making, both within the ANC and within government. And this is also leading to growing agitation. Some of the big issues, we know the economy is the first one, unemployment and access to jobs, one of the most pertinent issues. But of course, SMEs and entrepreneurship is a big one as well. Access to education, the issues of corruption, alienation from the leadership, land, substance abuse, climate justice is a big one coming up around young people. What kind of future is going to be handed to us as young people when we face the greatest existential threat of our humanity? There may not be a proper world to live in or proper oxygen to breathe, given the kind of climate crisis that we're in. And of course, social cohesion remains an issue. A whole thing needs to be dedicated to youth unemployment. For me, this is a major, major focus and a big takeaway in the fight for economic equality. We know the burden of unemployment is concentrated amongst young people. It's over 50%. I think Stats SA released the numbers a couple of weeks ago. It's 63.1%, which is disgustingly high of a youth unemployment rate. Here's the crisis, and I've underlined it. Young people are likely to remain structurally unemployed in the long run, meaning they will never find a meaningful job in their entire lifetime. And that's not something that can sit well with any of us. This is also important, independent of education level. Unemployment is high amongst young people. That means whether you have a degree or matric, of course, it's nuanced. I'm reducing it a bit. But the fact of the matter is that this idea of go to university, go to a college, you'll get a good job, that idea doesn't really exist anymore. And that's also leading to further anger on the ground. We know COVID-19 has exacerbated it. We know there's a focus or a need for a focus on entrepreneurship to become job creators and job seekers. But there's a serious need for intervention. That's why we've dedicated an entire section, an entire slide specifically on youth unemployment and access to the economy. Some of the perceptions of the ANC, very important, largely negative. We have to be honest about it. We feel, or young people often don't feel like there's enough representation of young people in the leadership. The ANC is not viewed as a young person's party. The fact that we need to create more space for young people to take up positions, influence policy and its implementation. The multiple scandals that have plagued the ANC over the last few years, also viewed as anti-women sometimes, and that's something that we need to fix. And in discussions around preparing for this, quite a few people, and I put in inverted commas, but I think it's important, is a huge perception that the ANC is somewhat of an old age home or a retirement center. And I know the old guard get a bit iffy about this point, but the truth of the matter is that's the perception, and that's where young people don't feel listened to. Of course, the corrupt patronage networks and the politics of gatekeeping, which also actively affect young people because it's very difficult to enter into the space and very difficult to actually get your foot through the door. We know this, that young people really don't feel represented. We've spoken about this. I think Comrade Lamola and Comrade Gwako spoke to this about the history of the ANC and young people being at the forefront. Unfortunately, now that's not the case. Right, so what do we need to sort of do here, right? We have to take true and positive steps to proper organizational renewal, not just in name. We need to govern effectively with integrity, honesty, and this is a big one. Deliver proper services to our people. Sometimes we have all these discussions about why we're losing support, when in reality, we're just not doing what we need to do for our people. We also have to build credibility and trust, which comes from delivering services, which comes from being proper leaders, which comes from a proper governance system and people being able to trust us. Very importantly, the ANC needs to reach out to young people in the spaces in which we exist. We need to organize and work with young people on those issues. And it's not just about checkboxing, or we've listened to young people, or we've had a public meeting. It's about ensuring that the views and the voices of young people actually have an influence in decision making and policies. We know about governance capacity, also needing to adapt to a changing situation in the country. And of course, we need to reconsider how we organize ourselves as members, as supporters and sectors in civil society. And I think that's where the conversation needs to come in about how do we evolve as the ANC? Because right now, signing a membership form that's physical, going, door to door, is that really how we need to engage with young people? I think we need to rethink it, because the current systems are clearly not working and young people are being felt or feel like they're being left behind. Also, we know the Youth League has lost its radical and militant approach on the issues of young people. It's not seen as a structure that really represents young people. And as has been said, there's a dire need to revive the Youth League to serve as that fighting force. But also importantly, in the reimagining, we need a richly diverse Youth League. And I don't just mean that in terms of race. We need to create more space for women, for people from the LGBTQIA+ community, various levels of educated youth and non-educated, in inverted commas, rural versus urban, unemployed versus employed. The point is we need a nice mix of different people, obviously all young, but coming with a different life experience in order for us to really rebuild the Youth League in a positive manner. And of course, all necessary to recapture the imagination of young people. So what's to be done? I think we need to also quite seriously rethink the identity of the ANC post-apartheid. That's a big part of the paper as well. What do we stand for now, especially in the quest for renewal as young people? Must support the progressive causes pursued by young people. We need to respond to those youth concerns and find solutions beyond the corridors of formal power structures. Because as we can see, especially in our communities, service delivery protests are often led by young people. We've seen community organizing led by young people, and that's outside of formal structures. So we also need to think beyond just parliament or just government. How do we actually go back to the ground to young people? Must, of course, build young cadres. We need to close the distance between ANC leaders and the youth. And this one I put in bold, the last point on the slide. We must put an end to the culture of conspicuous consumption and elaborate lifestyles, particularly of members, particularly of leaders, because that's causing a huge rift and a divide between the people and us. So yeah, young people we know are an untapped resource. We've recently entered into a demographic structure where basically the working age of our population to the number of dependents is perfect. So the number of people who can work to support our society and support our families is optimal. And that means we can have an opportunity, or one of the ways we can have an opportunity at accelerated economic growth. So we're in a prime time as young people in this country. Huge benefits of refocusing our energies towards young people. And of course, and this is really the big thing, young people need to be at the very center of our work, not just of policy making, but young people need to feel that the ANC takes them and our issues as paramount or of paramount importance. And then in closing, the last point, all is not lost. I think sometimes it's easy to get very disillusioned given what's going on in the country, given how we not listen to as young people, but there is in fact a very bright future. And if we navigate this well, we can have new life and new energy inserted into the party and inserted into the Youth League. And the honest truth is that they are dedicated, committed, passionate young people, many of which will be on this call and tuning in, and even beyond just the space, but people who are willing and ready to work within our ranks to rebuild. And those are not people we can leave behind. The tools are at our fingertips. We really do have to utilize them. And again, the ANC needs to be able to drive that political narrative of the country and not be doomed to follow or chase it. And final sort of parting words, young people are crying out, let it be the ANC who answers the call. Went through it very quickly, but the document is online, and I really just wanted to cover it very high level so people can get a real feel for what the document is, but more importantly, what the project or what I feel the project should be around young people in this country. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Comrade Fasia, and you were well within the time limit as well. Thank you very much. Sets a good tone. Thank you, Comrade Fasia. I think that was a very, very, very good input. Also unpacking that notion of youth as a separate strata and youth being restricted to certain activities and certain discussions. Something that I must say, as youth leaders in the Youth League, has often been a cause of conflict at times with seniors and with elders who have not been through the mold of youth leadership. and not understanding that youth have an ability and a right to speak on various issues other than that which we just see as youthful. So very good discussion, and you looked also at the document. There are various questions that have already been raised. I'm not going to go through them now because Comrade Lowe is going to read them out at some point. Now, I think we're just going to get a response to the three inputs. We'll have two panelists now as respondents to these particular inputs. I'm going to call upon our first respondent, Comrade Kolelwa Kashe Katia. Comrade Kolelwa is currently the Director of Project Management at the MISTRA, and which is responsible for the implementation and monitoring of the research projects of MISTRA. She's also attained a BSc degree from the University of Cape Town, and she's also got a postgraduate degree in from the University of Pretoria as well. And she's a thought leader, very much amongst young people, somebody whose thoughts are very much out there and very, very critical thinker. I'm now going to call upon Comrade Kolelwa to speak to us, but to speak to the three presentations and to basically share her views. Thank you, Comrade Kolelwa. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the invitation. Must say I was a bit intimidated by this invitation because, first of all, just as a disclaimer, I am not youthful in any way. So I always feel that it's always important to have young people speaking, on youthful issues. However, I have been interested in, the shifts among youth movements and the new activisms, and I also regard myself as an ally of those youth struggles, even though I have my own children who are part of this strata. But just still, while we're still on this issue of the category within society, and that category being one has its specific struggles, as indicated by Nwako in the beginning and also Minister Lamola. I'd like to comment on the location of this particular paper that was presented by FASIA, where it's located in terms of the bigger document, which is supposed to inform the NGC. It is worrying that it comes across to me as a footnote or a side issue that is not part of the mainstream. And I know there has always been a long debate around mainstreaming of youth issues. The second move I want to make is to actually find a relationship or a place for this particular paper and this subject matter within the social cohesion paper. And also I use that social cohesion paper as a frame of analysis of the paper that was presented by FASIA, but also being mindful of the inputs by the two comrades earlier. Now, using that framing of social cohesion, in our work at MISTRA that we've always done, we've always found this correlation between inequality and social cohesion. We find that the more unequal we are as a society, we're finding that we're pulling further apart, so we're not realizing or attaining cohesion. Now, what does this mean in terms of this particular session? I'd like to propose that as part of social inequality, we've always talked about inequality as something that's based on race or gender and so on, but I'd also like to add another category, which is age, where you find inequality between, the generations, with young people also becoming increasingly the face of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. Yesterday, some of us attended another session where the comrades were talking about the plan of action. There was this notion of feminization of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. And I'd like to put it here that there's also a juniorization or making poverty and all these things youthful. We saw the stats that came out from Stats SA with 60% unemployment among young people. That definitely shows that there is a disconnect there, wherein you find that the older generations have more access to opportunities. So what happens when groups feel excluded or marginalized, or feeling that they're not being heard, or they don't quite feel that they belong to the new nation state? They usually organize, they rebel, and sometimes, as we've seen in North Africa, they can overthrow whole regimes. So there is something that we need to pay attention to there. So in terms of cohesion in the country, I think it's very important to bring forward these issues, because there is a case to make for inequality that is along age lines, and that's beyond gender, beyond race, and so on. So what does that mean in terms of social cohesion and all the actions towards bringing the society together? Right now, we're talking about social compacting, which is happening at NEDLEC as the platform that's dealing with issues of dialogue and brokering relationships between different parts of society or social partners. But are youth issues being tabled there? Is the NEDLEC the correct platform to actually engage? Do youthful issues get recorded there? But then at the same time, these youthful issues are societal issues, because Fasia's paper also talks about how the youth are the majority of our society. So if young people are the majority, that means then these issues that concern young people are actually societal issues. And we also need to pay attention to this intergenerational trauma that comes with our society. And it is a result of this long history of colonialism and apartheid. But then this is the trauma that leads to violence, and violence comes in many forms. There's gender-based violence and so on. But these are some of the symptoms of the lack of cohesion, which is driven by inequality. So the paper correctly locates young people's issues within those broader societal issues of poverty, access, and even all the forms of violence. So what I'd like to then start looking at is this notion of new activisms. I know Fasia speaks to it in her paper, but I think the ANC is not really paying focused attention on the issues that are emerging with the new activisms that we've seen in recent years. I mean, there is always talk about Rhodes Must Fall movement or the Fees Must Fall movement, but there's also the total shutdown and also the Alex total shutdown. I mean, the former was speaking to gendered issues. It was specific to gender. And we saw also these movements, how they've been led by women, and also you see queer types of forms of leadership, something that we have not really seen before, but also at the same time applying methods that are not familiar to what I would say the ANC is accustomed to. And I think this is something that really needs to really be amplified in the paper, because it speaks to a reaction, and this reaction is a reaction to an intergenerational wound. I am glad that Minister Lamula spoke to the RDP of the soul, because during the transition, this is one of the issues that were meant to be the pillar of the RDP, but somehow we seem to have forgotten it. So also this disconnect or this tension between older generations and younger generations is also informed by that, because we do not pay attention to the process of healing. So you have older generations that are passing on a poisoned chalice to younger people. And that needs attention. And also, because of the woundedness now that's been inherited by the young generations, we see these ruptures in society through these hashtag movements, and a lot of it happens on social media. But I think it needs specific attention, because there is a particular shift in society, not just in South Africa, but globally too. And there is a need to understand these movements. And it's not wise to dismiss youth activism just because young people are not joining the ANC or the ANC Youth League or any other political party. It certainly does not mean that they don't have agency. And it certainly does not mean that they are disengaged politically. They are very engaged and politically so. Because all these issues that affect society, it's their lived experience. It's what we all experience in our everyday. So the reaction there, therefore, does not necessarily require these traditional forms of activism. So maybe what I would recommend is actually maybe Fasia and others who are involved in this whole renewal to actually pay attention to these new activisms, these new forms of displaying dissatisfaction, because they can actually be powerful. Right now, they seem uncoordinated, but the number of ruptures that we see mean that it is a force to reckon with. Now, what about the relationship between the Youth League and the ANC? It's also mentioned in the paper, and the two comrades before Fasia spoke to it at length. We know about the issue of consumerism, which was amplified by especially Fasia, and the celebrity culture, Instagram type of way of engaging with broader society, with all the issues and challenges that we are facing. And that seems to be quite prevalent in the ANC, and especially among the younger members of the ANC who at times get pushed up to take on responsibilities in government and elsewhere. And while they have not been prepared, because also there's a disconnect between the older generation, and sometimes you find that the poison chalice actually means, inheriting, bad elements in terms of leadership. What I find interesting is the silence on what happened at the fallout. I know Minister Lamula speaks to it, the fallout over economic freedom, land redistribution, nationalization of mines. But I think the biggest elephant in the room is the fact that it led to a formation of a whole new party that is actually threatening, the ANC, especially the ANC Youth League. And that needs to be amplified. We cannot call it something else, or that moment. And we do have this, and I think it's a societal thing. It's not just ANC, it's also South Africa, where we do not name things. It needs to be mentioned, it needs to be analyzed, and it needs to be understood. Now, what does that mean in terms of organizational renewal? Is there still relevance of the Youth League? Others outside the ANC even refer to the EFF as a youth league that just dressed in red. What I found strange, though, in the paper was in terms of recommendations. They do allude to education and education system and ways of instilling a sense of citizenship. However, what I don't find continuity in is when they speak to this notion of citizenship in terms of conscription, because they do mention the idea of military service, but I would suggest that that service, citizen service, needs to be extended beyond the military. They can be, the medical fraternity is already doing that, but it can be across the spectrum, education, all our sectors where there is challenges, especially in terms of institutional capacity. There are opportunities for young people there, maybe between university and high school, or it can even be post-high school, where there can be incentives for young people to actually participate meaningfully and contribute as active citizens meaningfully into education, health, and so on. So I think that needs to be amplified further and extended beyond military service. I also found it strange that there's just a slight mention of drug abuse, as if this is only a youth issue. But this is a societal issue. As I've said, we've passed on a poison chalice to young people. So that thing should not be used as an issue of young people. It's the issue of South Africans. Then there's climate change. There are opportunities identified for job creation there, but I feel that the paper can do a bit more on climate change, because for me, I could not find what it does in terms of the role of young people in the just transition. It does dwell a lot on climate change and what it means, the science thereof, but not so much in terms of translating it into what it means for young people. I didn't get much on technology, another global shift, and there are opportunities because young people are techno savvy. I mean, just on these sessions alone, I've seen like Fasia's presentation. You can see that even without any training, young people always have the technical know-how. Even in my own household, wherever you buy, you give it to a young person, they figure it out. And I think there are many opportunities for the ANC there. In terms of the final conclusion of that paper, the conclusion and recommendations are inward looking, which I think is very important. It doesn't go so much in terms of broader society, but I think it is important for it to be inward looking because it speaks to organizational renewal. And when the paper was introduced by Fasia, she spoke about how it is we need to find opportunity in what young people can offer. And I think placing young people at the center of the organizational renewal of the mother body, the ANC, not just the Youth League, because already I've posed the challenge that do we really still want to think about the relevance of the Youth League in this day and age? However, if we were to locate these issues, which I've argued are actually societal issues, they're not necessarily unique to young people, shouldn't we then have young people at the heart of this organizational renewal? In terms of the other project that we've been involved in, where we've been measuring the drift of our society towards cohesion or away from cohesion, we've got a barometer that measures this, and we release every year. And it was so interesting last year when we released the latest results, where we saw a positive shift on a single indicator. And that indicator had to do with institutional leadership, but specifically.
As you wrap up, Tom.
Yes. I'm almost finished. In terms of institutional leadership, we have seen that this move where all these youthful leaders from the Fees Must Fall movement who entered parliament, it did create a positive shift where we saw a shift from Isibujwa nation, which is very divided nation, towards Naile Walk, which is a more cohesive. It's just a single indicator, but it said something. And I wonder if then you can apply it across all institutions, whether it's in the private sector, labor, political movements, or across society, our communities, and so on. So I think there is an opportunity there, and not in the ANC, and not for the ANC, but for the whole of our society. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you so much, Comrade Polelwa, for a very, very good input. For actually, in a sense, it helps us when we listen to panelists who are, in a sense, outside of the day-to-day structural work of the organization. Looking at it in a sense from the outside, but still having a passion for the movement. It really helps. And I think a major point that you've raised, which I think young people have been grappling with, and if you look at the results of list conferences in the ANC, the talk around actually, no, let's take the discussion beyond Youth League revival and Youth League's role, but let's look at the role and space given to young people actually inside of the mother body itself, in the leadership of the ANC, because we see on the continent, in the rest of the world, the leadership in different countries also getting younger, voting population in South Africa also getting younger. So that's a very, very good debate that you've put on the table, and I'm hoping that young people will actually be basically engaging in that debate, but not only young people, because it speaks also to those who are leaving the ranks or have just left the ranks of youth as well. So thank you very much for those inputs, Kolelwa. The final comrade who's going to be speaking as a respondent is going to be a comrade that I've had pleasure of also working within the Western Cape. Comrade Tabile Dlamini, a firebrand student activist at the University of Cape Town, where she was the branch secretary of SASCO, somebody active in the branch of the Youth League at the University of Cape Town, a firm activist in the gender struggle. Comrade Tabile is currently the Treasurer General of the South African Students' Congress. I'm now going to call upon Comrade Tabile to speak to us and to respond to the inputs that were made. Comrade Tabile, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Program Director. Greetings to the leadership of the African National Congress, different branches, regions, and provinces. Greetings to the panel that is with us and the respondents. Greetings to people that are listening and watching at home and in different spaces. Firstly, I would like to appreciate this program and the chance for us as young people to come forward, especially in such a very important session where we discuss and look into the future of this country. Now, as a young person, when I was engaging the document, I was engaging the document obviously with the hopes of seeing that there's actually direction towards the future of South Africa. Now, when we started the discussion, the chair of the session actually highlighted what the council does and what the council stands for, of which when we look at our organization, council must be able to ensure that the organization complies with its governing documents. Now, the good thing about the African National Congress is that it has very good documents that actually give it base. That is the Freedom Charter, the Constitution of the country, and the principles and laws of the organization that are supposed to guide us when we're making resolutions for our future and the future of the organization. Now, looking at the document and reading it, looking at how the ANC looks at the issue of young people and how they contextualize issues of young people. I think it is very important to recognize, firstly, from the history that was given by the latter speakers, that the adoption of the program of action was a milestone for the organization and South Africa at large. When the youngest...
If I may just interrupt, there's a sound coming. I'm not sure whether it's on your side or somebody has their mic on.
It's definitely me, comrade. We've had the alarm going off since morning in the building. Please forgive me.
Okay, no, that's fine. No, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you. Continue. Sorry for interrupting.
Okay, that was when the youngest Guardian in 1952 embarked on mass action to ensure that South Africa is able to self-sustain as a country. Now, the youth post-1994 should be living in a very radically different life as opposed to those in 1976. But this is still a dream up for reach for many South Africans. The country is failing to drive economic growth. There is a huge gap impact when it comes to education, income, employment, depending on where you live. Now, the idea I had for engaging the document was, of course, mainstreaming and paying close attention to three things that I would like to touch on. The first one is going to be education, and obviously linking very much to the economy. And looking at the ANC Youth League as a structure of the ANC that actually represents white people, and then looking at the feminist theory and how the ANC actually contextualizes it. And of course, given the chance, I would also like to give solutions to the problems that I've also identified. Now, it is very clear that if you want to develop a country or a society, you need to give young people the necessary tools that they need. There, you need to extend deeper on engaging on issues of unemployment and education. You need to engage deeper on issues of gender-based violence in South Africa. Why is the economy of South Africa unable to produce productive, employed youth? The youth is very much underemployed. That leads them to be self-employed under vulnerable occupations, as the document has stated. Young people are running businesses for the table, which means it is a hand-to-mouth approach, which actually leads to their businesses to the fall down. Now, if we look at the education sector and how education is contextualized in South Africa, and actually look at the solutions that we as young people, especially as activists that are in our campuses, and are the ones that are receiving students and are the ones that are actually dealing with the issues that students come across. What you may all see and what we all know as it stands in South Africa is that the chance to make it is very dependent on the quality of education that you receive. Quality education can contribute to the growth of South Africa. Education, however, is commodified because the best kind of education is the ones that you have to pay for. Now, with students and activists, we still are battling with the issue of institutions that are charging students very high prices for them to be able to acquire an education and actually contribute to the economy of this country. Going back to this basic schooling system, which of course on its own is seemingly failing. We have a large number of communities and society that have dropouts. We have a large number of students that that are not able to study up until the level of matric. The education system is blind to the economic and social factors of poor and learning conditions. The very same student that crosses the river to get to class is expected to have the same level of requirements to enter institutions of higher learning as a student who does not have the same challenges, which actually becomes a challenge when students enter into institutions of higher learning, because that's where you see that there is a greater gap between the social and the economic aspects of young people in South Africa. The curriculum content of South Africa, how does it promote towards STEM field and skills to support the industrial policy towards economic recovery? Half of the youth in South Africa is heavily dependent on social grant from when they are at a young age. Now you get to university, you're still dependent on government assistance through financial aid. Now let us note that financial aid does not fund postgrad in most instances, and still, you still need skills and to further your qualifications for you to get a job, a good paying job that is. Therefore, we are left with graduates that are unskilled and unable to continue their studies, which further contributes back to unemployment. We have TVET colleges in South Africa, of which some are doing well, but many are situated in areas where the conditions are not conducive for students to be able to get the same education in the higher education sector. TVET colleges at large, in many instances, are regarded as a dumping site in South Africa, where students in TVET colleges are not given the same attention to their needs as those in universities. Seemingly, the government cannot carry out the financial burden of the education system. Up until this day, students are still fighting fees in institutions of higher learning. Now, when we look at the difference between young women and men in this country, young women who matriculated are still less than men in this economy of South Africa. Less women pursue STEM field career. Now, looking at the ANC Youth League as a structure of the ANC, which actually is supposed to be a structure that contributes a lot to how the youth perceives how we can develop our country, it is very important to actually look at how the ANC Youth League itself is operating. Why are young people losing interest in something that has been achieved after so many losing so many lives, shedding so many so much blood in South Africa, which is democracy? It wasn't achieved that easily. But why is it that young people are no longer interested in politics? Why are young people not interested in engaging on how we can all contribute into moving this country forward? Why has the ANC Youth League left a vacuum in society for other organizations to champion youth issues? If branches are inactive, who will be on the ground for issues that arise to be taken up and actually make the public aware that there are issues that are happening in these communities where actually young people are situated? Are those in leadership able to articulate the struggles of young people? Can the Youth League as a structure relate to someone who is at the age of 14 today, as we understand that the Youth League represents from the age of 14 to 35? How effective are political schools in our organization? How do we make sure that our organization will still maintain and remain an intellectual hub? Because as we know, young people, vast majority of young people are either getting an education or working towards a qualification or in the labor market. Which youth has proximity to benefit more from the ANC? Even when you look at the dialogues that we hold, how representative of the youth in this country are the dialogues, so that we are able to get a holistic and a broader approach of what exactly is happening with young people in South Africa. Is the youth of the 80s too preoccupied with putting food on the table than doing the work of the organization? Now, without disputing the fact that the Youth League has power to be very proactive in society between the middle class and lower class society, Why are young people losing faith in something such a milestone, which is democracy? What is our country late in its demographic divide? Why is the Youth League not producing comrades who will be in parliament and be the voice for young people? Also, going back to looking at the Youth League and how it operates, are the leaders of the ANC actually influencing who leads in the Youth League, and how much trust does the organization have on young people to be able to lead themselves and champion their own struggles? Another issue which we need to look at is elitism. Our organizations must be able to reflect the entire society so that the better ones are not chosen out of the society, because the better ones are not created by the organization, but by the people who are leading in structures, who prefer people who will champion the struggles of people better or differently from what young people who actually experience them with. Now, I always wonder what the feminist concept of the African National Congress is. Has the ANC engaged on how to contextualize feminism in the South African context and in Africa at large? How do we ensure that our society is able to learn and unlearn, of which is a very big task, because you get that even when we are having engagements in organizations, you would get that a political report is given. None of it touches on gender-based violence. None of it touches on issues that affect women in South Africa. None of it touches on unemployment and the education sectors. Our organizations inclusive and representative of all genders? Are people of different genders educated? All right, as I wrap up, comrade, I will just quickly move to the solutions that I had written down as a proposal. Of course, it's just a short brief and there's more. Moving on, I think in the African National Congress, women must be in finance committee where decisions are made. We must always remember that there needs to be an inclusive voice and a voice that is representative of every member of society. We must always ensure that we guard against the organizations fall down, and ensure that we guard the organization and make sure that it's progressive. But on the lighter note, and a bigger one, is that our education system is very much failing in this country, and the African National Congress actually needs to pay more attention to that. Now, as we embark on moving towards the elected Congress of the ANC and the NGC of the ANC, we are hoping that as young people, we are going to see more of the issues that we are raising. And I'm also hoping that for further engagements, if we are able to set a conference of a whole weekend discussing and deliberating issues of young people, let us have online sessions, because as much as we understand that we have an issue of access in South Africa, young people are willing to engage. Let us have these sessions and extend them, and have voices of young people that are actually in the communities and experiencing all the challenges that we want to see the African National Congress address in South Africa. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Comrade Tabile, for really also drawing on your experience in the student movement, your current experience, and the kind of issues that SASCO has been raising, particularly around the system of education in our country, and the commodification of education, and how that speaks to the future of youth activism. Very, very, very important points raised, Comrade Tabile, and I'm sure the conversation is going to continue. Comrades, we don't have a lot of time left. We're scheduled to finish at 1:30. So I'm going to just hand over to Comrade Lowe to just indicate some of the questions that are there, because I see there are a few hands up as well. Comrade Lowe, do you want to read out some of the questions that have been raised before I raise any, before I give the floor over to anyone who's got their hands up?
Okay, Chair. There is a number of them, and maybe just to reaffirm the point you made at the beginning, that this is an ongoing dialogue, it's an ongoing discussion. So we are asking comrades if they could also use the Facebook platforms and even this platform to continue in discussion. So the idea really is not to be exhaustive on all of the issues that comrades are raising. But just to pick a couple here, Romano Asperito Jacob says that the statement Africans in general and Blacks in particular is divisive as it excludes us as colored. Imagine being marginalized as colored and a youth. Katla Khotsolo, key to the emancipation of the youth is good corporate governance and ethical leadership. In the absence of that, we will never emancipate the youth. Youth emancipation goes hand in hand with aspiring to achieve an ethical and developmental state. Saki Mhlongo, if the youth has no robust economic forums in place that brings them together to speak and innovate on economic matters, there is not much that can happen. Youth must form strong economic forums and start businesses and deliver real services by identifying real problems and coming with solutions. Saki Mhlongo then says economic freedom will remain a difficult cause as a result of our own cadres who are in strategic positions of responsibility, being owners of mines and also sharing government land through allocating themselves funds. Hence, nationalization and land reforms are not prioritized. These two are some of the key economic strongholds of our economy. Lidumisa Ngele, is there anything which still attracts young people into the ANC and ANC Youth League except the quest for celebrity culture? And then Brett Sanders, we need to understand the problems we face as youth, but this should not affect us driving programs at branch level and municipalities. This is where we have power from the ground up. Then also from Facebook, I just want to pick 3 comments in particular. There's one from Noel Abram, part of the comment which says, we need to adopt a mentorship program where the experience and acquired skills of veterans are passed on to the youth. Thabo Shingani, the only way for the ANC to survive the mess we face is to put young people in charge. The only people in touch with young people of this country are the youth left on the periphery. Then there's a comment from Pumzile Duduza that's repeated by a number of others that one thinks probably needs some response to, and is asking Pumzile, where is the youth in this discussion? I think I'll leave it at that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade Lau. Before handing over to the panel quickly, I'm just going to take the hands that are on the floor. I see Comrade Romano's hand is up, but his question was posed by yourself, Comrade Lau. So I'm going to call upon Comrade Kumani Makwele to pose his question, and then I'm going to also ask the next one after that, because I've got a list of those whose hands are up. Comrade Kumani, very briefly, please. We've only got until 1:30.
Thank you, Comrade Khalid. Just a quick one. I'm just interested on the question that was once raised by Comrade Tito Mboweni in relation to the question of foreign nationals who are working in our restaurants and who are working in most businesses in the country. And yet it seems to me that the ANC is very scared and afraid to confront this question of organized labor, to say that we cannot allow young people, South African young people who are in our townships, to be excluded to participate in the labor because of the owners of businesses who choose to employ foreign nationals because of the exploitative nature of the work employment. And I think young people must take up, if we are serious about this notion of unemployment of young people, we must be able to discriminate when it comes to labor. There is no country that does not discriminate when it comes to labor for the benefits of its young people. It's up to us, therefore, to make sure that young people who are employed in non-skilled labor, in areas of work where there is no need for specialized skills, it cannot be. Therefore, I'm interested, even the paper that Comrade Fazia presented, that component is missing because we know historically ANC is afraid to answer the question of foreign nationals in this country. Thank you very much, Comrade Khalid.
Thank you, Comrade Kumani. I'm going to ask now Comrade Romano. Quickly, Comrade Romano.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, all. I just wanted a question to Comrade Lamola regarding youth. When you look at politics, the economy, as well as education, the youth does not get preference and featuring there. And that might lead to to South Africa, the growth rate and everything that we need to grow and to emancipate ourselves to achieve that. Now, my question to him is, while he is at that strategic position, what is he doing from his side to ensure that we can get more youth in strategic, political, economic, and in the education sector?
Thank you, Comrade Romano. Thank you very much. Comrades, just to say that the team of the ANC have agreed that we can go up to 1:45. So we're going to go up to 1:45, comrades, and no longer 1:30, given the thirst for questions and engagement. Comrades, I'm now going to ask Comrade Prof. Molloy, Absalom Prof. Molloy. I see he's got his hand up. Prof?
Okay. Can you hear me, comrade?
Yes, we can hear you, Professor.
Yeah, number one, I think is Comrade Kole, I think she put it very correctly when she talked about the mistake that was committed by the then leadership of the ANC when it bans or suppresses the ideas of the young ones. I think it is in the 90s or so. So what I'm going to ask or propose is that if the youth of the 40s were able to show the way and change the course of events of the ANC, why can't the present leadership of the mother body do the same with the present youth? Allow them to come with new ideas that will take this country to the very bright future, and not make youth, like Comrade Lamola had said, to be the lapdogs of the ANC. So at the end, or conclusively, I can say the mistake was done by our leadership when they ultimately caused the creation of this other party, where you can see the militants and the new ideas of our youth have gone. I will never mention it by name, but everybody knows it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Comrade Khalid. I'm done.
Ondela. Comrade Linde Kushle Vilakazi.
Comrade,
we can't hear you.
is there on? Where must I?
Okay, we've lost Comrade Lindo Kushle. I'm now going to ask Comrade Msutu, Msangenduna Msutu. He has had his hand up. Comrade Msutu.
Oh man. Yes, thanks, Comrade Chairperson. I would like to pose about two questions regarding the two panelists. The first one, I was glad to hear from Comrade Ulamola when he's explaining the umfu that they had during their youth eras when he was a DP then at the youth league. So what I needed to find out at the current juncture that we are in now, all this nationalization that started from the youth level. So where does it's going to be put forward, especially from him also, who was at the forefront back then? So what is stopping him now to do the same, as we've noticed how vibrant they were during that era at the youth league? So what stopped them now to encourage the current youth of today to emulate what they've started, because those issues that they've started are still the issues that we're having today. And fortunately for him, he's in the executive, of which he can put forward such issues. The second one also on him is regarding the portfolio that he's having on the government. As the youth also, we're noticing what is happening in the justice system. And he's in the justice system. How can he put the faith in the youth in particular by correcting what is happening in the justice system now? Because we witness it day in, day out. The constitution has been ripped apart. So how can he justify it? Actually, he's supposed to, because it's his portfolio. As the youth who are witnessing this and who are learning from the books what is supposed to be, can he be in the forefront to correct these shambles that we are witnessing? Thank you, Comrade Chairperson.
Thank you, comrades. Comrades, I'm now going to hand over to Comrade Sindiso in Tlhabati. Comrade Sindiso.
Afternoon, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, comrade.
Okay. All right. Comrade Khalid, mine is a quick one, and it's mainly within the PYA structures that I'm going to be structuring my question. I had a conversation with the late Sindiso Makaka, my namesake, at a wedding of his cousin before he passed on years back. And the critical question is that then the Youth League was still not inactive. He had highlighted that the biggest way for the Youth League to be more relevant is if the PYA structures also become relevant themselves. And the conversation then played into how do we then ensure that COSAS becomes a radical institution for young people at high school level in terms of advancing fair education, along with other struggles that young people are facing in their part, along with SASCO, along with the ANC Youth League and partners that are there to ensure that young people have a voice that is relevant through the correct structures. Now, I then pose the question to the leadership that is here, whoever might want to address it, is that in terms of where the state of the PYA is right now, how do we address the question of the fact that the relevancy of the entire PYA has lost out to other institutions and NPOs that are out there? And the voice of the child, of the African child, is lost in that narrative. And we need to bring that back. And the African National Congress's PYA needs to be at the forefront. So we have lost out on that particular element of it, but we need to bring it back. I don't know how at the moment, but I love what the paper has been said. So yeah, I'll leave it at there because there's a lot more, but I can't shut.
Thank you so much, comrades. Comrade Ratulo Lee.
Thank you, Chair. If I can sum up the discussions that I've been hearing here, is that most of the panelists and respondents are talking about how young people can be an asset to the revolution and an asset to the country. What I would like to find out is what is their perspectives on how young people can collaborate using data, using new technologies to form a program of action that can enable them to revive youth structures and make and align priorities of the revolution to priorities of the country, because there are so many challenges that are happening out there, but most of the time we're inward looking. So how do we find a synergy between these two priorities by building young people to be assets to the revolution and assets to the country? Thank you.
Thank you, comrade. I'm now going to call upon Comrade Hope Papa. Comrade Hope.
Yes, the host had muted me. Comrades, quickly, I don't agree with the perspective which was given about the debate within SAICO, SANSCO, COSAS, YCS, SUKA, which culminated in the formation of the PNYC, of the Youth League towards the formation. That issue of autonomy versus independence, there were nuances which Comrade Lamola did not reflect when the decision was arrived that they should be independent, not independence, but autonomy, structural and organizational autonomy within the African National Congress, politics and ideology. Then he says that Comrade Duma says we should be allowed to have even different political orientation. Maybe he should clarify that issue, because the Youth League is founded on the basis of a conference resolution of the ANC. It was not brought into the ANC. So that issue needs to be clarified, because how do you have a Youth League which has a political orientation which is different and even hostile to the policy positions of its mother body? And he then says there were mistakes made where they were propagating views which were not ANC views. And now it brings me to this issue of even that time when Youth League had a difference with Dr. Xuma, who called them upstarts and so on. I mean, it's reflected in a number of autobiographies and books of President Mandela and other leaders. But it was not a takeover of the ANC. They had problems with Xuma and a few other leaders who called youth leaders who were in the ANC upstarts. They couldn't even speak in meetings and so on. But there were other leaders like J.B. Marks, Moses Kotane, who were elected at the 1949 conference of the ANC by the youth leaguers. So the notion of a takeover of the ANC and a youth and mix, generation mix, maybe that issue must also be addressed, because there are comrades who are talking about takeover and not a generational mix, which in 1949 was a generational mix, because they elected older comrades. J.B. Marks and Kotane were older than even Mandela and Dr. Xuma, but they were re-elected by younger comrades because they agreed on the program of action. The last issue I want to mention is that, can we talk of youth league of 35 years when South Africa is predominantly youth? The issue of 35 years, is it still relevant, that issue? Because there were reasons why the age limit of 35 was agreed to after 94. And can we talk of youth without youth being politicized from birth? Not only by socio-material conditions, actively politicized from kindergarten at home, when we have almost 65% of South African families, mainly in African and colored communities, dysfunctional and being toxic environment for children to grow in. And then we expect people suddenly they are at university, they are at high school to be political. Even before they reach COSAS, what happens from birth until they start school in terms of politics? Maybe let me leave it there, but there are many other issues which were raised, which I don't agree with in terms of the perspective. It's fine. We can engage even further.
Thank you, Comrade Houpen. I think it's very important that we do raise critical views indeed, and I'm hoping that panelists will respond, Comrade Lamola in particular. The last two questions, Comrade Sokomani, Ondela Sokomani. Okay,
Thank you, Comrade Khalid. No, I wanted to first appreciate the engagement, but my commentary is around the fact that you need to understand collectively as members of the ANC and as activists and members of the ANC Youth League, that young people are impatient. And so the agitation, which has seemingly over the years subsided within the ANC, the corridors of the ANC, by virtue of the incorrect and ill-advised decision of the then ANC leadership collective to dissolve the ANC Youth League in 2013, has led to a situation wherein populists, movements, and even NGOs at times are seen to be leading struggles of young people in general. As a result, even within our own movement, we have lost an understanding of what defines a capable leader, what should be a characterization of the leadership and activists of the Youth League within the ANC. Because all people are comfortable with the status quo. As a result, and in fact, those that are former leaders of the ANC Youth League who have led in the past, many of them continue to be beneficiaries of the non-existence of the Youth League because they see themselves as forever young, and therefore there is a understanding of them being a golden generation of the ANC Youth League. And so I agree with Comrade Lamola and other comrades in saying, indeed, the project of establishing and reviving the Youth League ought to take place. But you need to be cognizant of the fact that, comrades, the question of rainbow nation and social cohesion remains a theory and impractical for as long as the national question is not addressed. Because you can't interface with the discussion of the South African economy if you're not going to deal with matters of race and racial equality and inequality in particular. So would want to just, I just wanted to make that comment to say that these engagements are proper. However, we need to ensure that we are true to the fact that the material conditions are not in favor of the current status quo of not having the Youth League present to lead the discourse of youth struggles within the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Comrade. Thank you for that question. Very pertinent question. Comrade, I'm going to ask now Prof. Waleng, Professor Waleng.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, yes. You are very much audible, Professor.
Yeah, firstly, I just want to say it's right what they're saying. The previous Youth League was very, very proactive. And I think already at this point, we have the power for us to change whatever it is that is delaying the youth of South Africa to be proactive again. So I would very much like to challenge our members in the mother body and higher society to actually look at the Youth League not as an influencing body, but as a decision-orientating body, to ensure that within our capabilities of leadership, we are able to elect members that stand for youth representation in parliament and in other structures of government, where youth empowerment is focused on purely on the act of youth empowerment, not on favoritism as mainly is placed. So members like Comrade Lamola have the mandate to look into their structures and see how they can start involving the youth beyond just a league in the ANC. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Comrade. Very short and concise. Comrade Zama, Sigwebela.
Thank you, Chair. And let me also thank the panelists for making critical inputs to the discussion. I want to rise from the historical perspective on the memory lane of the ANC Youth League. Chair, I think the relationship of the ANC and the ANC Youth League, it needs to be defined in paper, and all the necessary aspects needs to be outlined. Why I'm saying so? Because we are saying that the ANC Youth League has it has a task to rally young people behind the ANC. Second, we are saying the ANC Youth League, it is a preparatory school for the ANC. And what does that mean? It means that the ANC Youth League, it must have an interest in the ANC and the direction, and to influence the direction of the ANC. So in this context, it then means that, but we are not defining, or the ANC is not defining, when it says the preparatory school, what is the preparatory school? And what content and to what extent the preparatory school is must go? Because I want to agree with Comrade Ronald to say that the autonomy of the ANC Youth League is very important, because if we are saying that the ANC Youth League and the ANC Youth League members, they are in a preparatory school, they must have freedom to exercise and raise ideas without fear, and to influence and lobby the position or policy perspective inside the ANC. To go to a conference and the view gets defeated, it's another story. But if we're saying the preparatory school, the ANC flick must be able to raise ideas and lobby them inside this. Unless if we want a different ANC flick, it would be that the ANC flick, it would be ANC flick that would be doing what we have seen that is doing. Because you check from when you check moving in
Comrade
the
Zama, can you wrap up, Comrade Zama?
yes, Chair. As I
Time,
conclude,
yeah.
as I conclude, the last conference of the ANC flick, you can't trace even the resolution of the Congress to show the continuity of the program of economic freedom with the 7 cardinal pillars, of which that itself it derails what the ANC flick is saying and what it seeks to achieve. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Comrade Zama. Comrade Vilakazi, yours is the last question we are taking.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, it seems, Comrade Vilakazi,
No.
are you?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Please. Yes.
Okay, yeah. My question or my comment is very simple, Chair. Is that the Youth League, the tax team, has got lots of people who are not young enough to make sure that it represents the interests of us as young people. As in KwaZulu-Natal, we can't get through the membership of the ANC Youth League because the ANC Youth League is under-colonized by certain of people, certain of leaders who are more older, who are old, and they are achieving they are getting every position to the Youth League in the municipality and everywhere to represent the interests of young people, while we are not represented because even in there, they are not representing us. They represent themselves and the business people. So,
Comrade,
the
can you
ANC
just pose the question, Comrade?
Yeah.
Yeah, because we need to wrap up. Yeah.
Shapo.
Okay. Thank you. Comrades, I'm going to hand over now to the panel. There were some questions which were very, very direct to certain members of the panel. I'm going to allow for 2 minutes for each panelist and also 2 minutes for the 2 respondents. And then we're going to wrap up. I'm going to start with Comrade Lamola. Comrade Lamola, can you respond? Because there were questions posed to you directly, Comrade Lamola. But 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Comrade Khalid. There were many. I won't be able to answer all of them. Others will speak offline. I will just speak to only few. One is that with regards to the position or the point with regards to Dumanogwe, I quoted what he said verbatim. It's what he wrote. And there's no way why I said it should have a different orientation to that of the ANC. And neither Dumanogwe said that. What I said is that obviously, in historical terms, there was a time where the Youth League came up with ideas which were not yet adopted as ANC position. And such example include the armed struggle. And ourselves, when we proposed some of the positions at our time, some of them were not positions of the ANC, like expropriation of land without compensation, which I suggested that can I take a sorry, Chair?
Comrade Lamola has taken. I'm now going to ask. I'm going to ask Comrade Sela Malola to give his responses. Comrade Lamola has just taken a brief break. Comrade Sela Malola, Ngwako.
Yeah, thank you very much, Comrade Khalid. Just a few comments as a way of summary. I think we must disabuse ourselves first as ANC Youth League members and young people to believe that youth empowerment is deployment in legislative chambers or in councils. I think if we disabuse ourselves from that, we will have much more broader understanding of what the youth are thinking and interested in. The question of age, I think the Youth League must discuss that matter. I have my own views. I think I do consider. I think 35 years is very, very old, and should not be regarded as youth. I will not be very happy to be regarded as youth, though I am still youth by law. There was an issue about the ANC Youth League and NGOs taking lead in the revolution and so forth and so on. I think there are things that we must note. The ANC Youth League must provide strategic leadership to all young people, including young NGOs, including in church, in everywhere where young people are found, in sports fields, everywhere. The ANC Youth League must provide strategic political leadership. This must not mean that the ANC Youth League must be in conflict with the structures of youth, young people. It means that it must be able to bring together all energies of young people and knit those energies together in the interest of the revolution. I think lastly, Chair, we think the entirety of all young people and everybody must acknowledge that though there is there have been a lot of activeness of young people in calling for, in particular, their organization to come back. In this regard, you all know that there was a disbandist movement, and there was as well recently the ANC Youth League Crisis Committee that has put in pressure even on the leadership of the ANC to affirm young people as people who must lead and rebuild their own organization. And I think the attempts to say young people have been doing nothing and have been quiet must be rebutted. And due acknowledgement must be given to those that have not been. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Comrade Ngwako. Comrade Lamola, you are back from the fatherhood duties. 1 minute, Comrade Lamola, to complete your input. Thank you.
Thank you. My apology, Jefferson, for that. That is
No,
a
it's
chair
good.
reason why we should no
No,
longer be
it's,
in.
no, it's good. No, it's good, Comrade Lamola. You are producing the next layer of leadership.
Yeah, thank you. No, I was just concluding on that point that I raised. Firstly, the one that the Youth League, there will be times where it will come with policies which are not ANC policy at the time. And I was raising the issue of the armed struggle and what we raised ourselves at the time, which was expropriation of land without compensation. The issue that needs to be resolved is how then do you manage such issues when the Youth League needs to come up with new ideas, because there is no way that it can come up with a new idea which is already resolved as an ANC policy at a particular point in time. So a functioning Youth League will from time to time come up with sometimes ridiculous ideas. So there will be a need of that nexus of defining the autonomy and how you then channel that energy of new ideas to help infuse the direction of the ANC. On constitutionalism, Comrade Chair, I think I cannot agree more with the Speaker. Since its foundation, the ANC was founded on constitutionalism principles by people like Pixley Gaseme and many others who came with the ideas of the formation of the ANC. From the beginning, they spoke about equality before the law. They spoke about the role of the franchisement of the African majority and so forth. And even many documents of the ANC, the African Claim, the Freedom Charter, Ready to Govern, spoke about a state where the constitution is the supreme law of the land, which all of us must respect, including that of the rule of law. So I can't speak more on that. The last point with regards to the role of young people reviving the Youth League, what Comrade Moko has raised, is now a resolution of the NEC that the relaunch process of the Youth League must be led by young people as defined by the current laws of the country. But that debate that is raised by Comrade Hope might be necessary as young people take this baton, whether a young person who is just under 35, 30, and 33, 34, 35, with a family, with the various interests, is he indeed still a young person, though defined technically by law to be young? But it's a necessary debate within the structures of the Youth League in terms of his role and in terms of his interest in society, or her interest in society. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Comrade Lamola. Comrade Fasia.
Thanks, Comrade Chairperson. I'm going to do my best with the time you've given. Look, I think, let me quickly comment on this thing of 35. I do think we need to have a more open discussion about it. And maybe one of the things that we decide during this renewal can be something around, we don't elect people who are going to be over the age of 35 during their term. And that would then speak to what Comrade Lamola is saying around, electing people who are 32, 33, etc. And then I saw some of the comments. I thought it is important to mention that I am in fact in my 20s. So it's not just a panel of people who are not necessarily within that age group. So I thought that's important. But generally, I think, Comrade Ondela, you said this. You said that young people are impatient. And actually, I think that's one of the best things about us. It's that impatience that says to us, well, why should we accept the current status quo? Why should we keep saying yes when in fact we need to do something to change it? But it's that thing that gives us that fire that drives us to say, well, actually, we're not going to accept it and we're actually going to change it. And the process is taking too long. So maybe that's not a bad thing. And maybe that's something that we need to harness and push moving forward. Comrade Roundtable spoke about young people collaborating with technology to create a program of action. And I fully agree with him that it needs to be not just inward looking, but, beyond that. How do we bring more people into the space, especially more young people? There was a question also in the chat box from Comic Crispin around the efficacy of COSAS, and someone else also asked this, especially around the dropout rate. But maybe we also need to evolve how COSAS works as well. When I was in SASCO and I was the provincial treasurer, we also pushed to think a little bit differently about how we engage with people and how we actually do our work as student activists and student leaders. And that ultimately, in many ways, led to fees must fall. So I also agree with this idea. He speaks about the characterization of youth matters, not just being in the purview of the Youth League. And that's very, very correct. And it speaks to what Olelwa was speaking about as well, that there's two schools of thought, right? So you can push youth issues on one side. We have a youth league, we have a women's league, etc. But there's another school of thought, and maybe they're not as mutually exclusive as I'm saying, that says we need to mainstream these issues. So we as young people need to then say, well, we're going to contest for our ANC branch. We're going to contest for the ANC directly. And we're going to change the same things we have issues with now. We're going to change it from within the ANC mother body itself. And I think that's a very important discussion to have. Now, that doesn't mean we don't revive the Youth League. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. But it does mean that we identify where we'll be the most useful and where we can get as much change done. And then, direct our efforts in that regard. And I see you unmuted. So there's just one quick thing I want to say just before I close. I think it's very easy for us to be critical and to tear things down. I think it's a lot more difficult to say we're going to build something in its place. And that, I think, needs to be the focus, right? So we've done a lot of problem analysis on where the issues are as young people, youth unemployment, alienation, of national groups, etc. We've identified the problems. We now need to say, well, what are we going to put in its place? How are we going to create that? And how do we do that as a mass base to take us to the next step, keeping in mind the fourth industrial revolution without leaving people who don't even have access to electricity? And that goes back to this final point I want to make, which is the diversity of young people we need in this space. So we can only achieve that if we have young people from all walks of life in that same space by saying, this is our experience, this is what we're going to push forward. And last thing, it's a utopian idea, but that's what we need to change the world, right? We need these grand ideas and these bold thinking so that we can actually hopefully have a youth league and young people in the ANC who change the game. Thanks.
Thank you, Comrade Fasia. Thank you very much. I'm now going to just hand over to the discussants or the respondents. I'm going to start with Comrade Kolelwa and then Comrade Tabile. And then we will wrap up. Your responses, please, to some of the questions. Comrade Kolelwa.
Thank you, Chair. I think my response quickly is just a reflection as an outsider on what are referred to as the holy cows. And I suppose this has become a tradition wherein we don't have an honest dialogue about certain things, and there's a bit of silencing. At times, we even silence ourselves. And I'm seeing this, it's an observation, but it's not unique to this platform alone. It's there in the ANC, it's there in our society at large. And these holy cows have to do with race, number one, and they have to do with gender and the spectrum of all those things, especially when it comes to the LGBTQIA plus communities. And then there's this one of age. So you see a lot of silencing where even it's difficult to engage because there's the issue of respectability politics, how you engage with older generations. However, I must say I am getting increasingly hopeful with young people in pushing these issues forward, even though there isn't much of a response or there is a bit of silencing, sometimes even self-silencing. But I think all the generations need to take responsibility for the psychological scars that we have left unattended, and now young people have become the beneficiaries of that scar. And I think this is what's leading to this. There's many other holy cows. There's the issue of xenophobia, which was raised by Khumani, who spoke about opportunities and this tension with foreign nationals. That is also another conversation that's silenced, and it's difficult to engage without being labeled xenophobic. And then the issue of the EFF, I call it, I name it because again, I'm an outsider, but I've noticed how it is it's quite a holy cow within this specific space. And I think if the ANC Youth League in particular is going to renew itself, you need to have an honest and open conversation and name it, that thing that happened at that fallout that has led to this situation. So I think I'll just leave it there. Like, be mindful of holy cows. It's difficult conversations, but these difficult conversations need to be had if we are going to move forward and if we are going to renew. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Comrade Kolelwa. Comrade Tabile, your final inputs and concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Comrade Khalid. My final inputs and remarks are just going to be that strategizing and creating strategies is good. It definitely improves our tactics. However, how about we start implementing as the organization? How do we ensure that our policies are diverse and complex and are progressive to that matter? How do we ensure that our policies are not reactionary, but are actually policies that are going to sustain the country? How do we ensure that the country has an approach to feminism, particularly with women in South Africa and women in the rural areas and townships? With us wanting to see more women in finance committees, wanting to see more women in spaces of leadership. And we must always remember that unpaid labor and informal businesses are not put in the GDP. An equal pay gap still exists in these rural areas and township. And let us also keep in mind that modernization, as much as it's good, many people in this country are going to be left behind. More importantly, workspaces must be very inclusive to members of the LGBTQI and the disabled, even though I don't like putting these together. Let's prioritize our mental health, and let us ensure that our government has a clear plan on how we eradicate drugs and actually investigate whether our rehabilitation centers and our correctional services are actually rehabilitating or creating better monsters to come back and contribute to a society that has gender-based violence on a high and women and children not safe in our country. So I'm hoping that moving forward, our discussion will look further into these things and we can be able to come back here in this platform and say that from our discussion, this is what we've seen improving. This is what is led for us to continue with. Other than that, thank you for the platform, Chair, and thank you for everyone who's here.
Thank you so much, comrades. And I want to thank the panel for your responses. I know there are certain questions that may not have necessarily been responded to. In fact, I'm just getting a message now from one of the people who made the input, Comrade Matwele, saying that his question around xenophobia was not responded to. Does anybody want to respond to that before I conclude, or else we conclude? Any one of the panelists on the issue of the xenophobia matter? Comrade Ronald Lamola. and then I'll conclude. Comrade Lamola.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I was muted by the host, so thank you for unmuting me. Yeah, Chair, I don't think it's an issue that it's a holy cow that the ANC government is not dealing with. It's what has been found through Home Affairs is that there has not been enough inspectorate to inspect all the workplaces and all that to ensure that indeed those that are there are those that are required by law to be there in terms of what is called skilled labor. And Home Affairs is currently recapacitating themselves and gearing themselves to do that job. You will know that last week, just the day when the president was responding to questions, the critical skills that we can allow to come through Home Affairs, the list was published, which now shows what skills are there that should be allowed in terms of for work permit for those that are not South African nationals, so that they can still work, but which skills is not allowed and so forth. So Home Affairs is working on that, and I think there is progress. It might not yet be visible, but I think with time, it will be surely visible. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Comrade Lamola. Comrade Tolelwa, I see your hand up. Before I close the session.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to add to that a bit on foreign nationals. I think we must be reminded that South Africa is a destination of choice. If you look at the proportion of migrants in South Africa compared to the world at large, or even sub-Saharan Africa, you find that we've got a huge intake. The proportion of migrants is 7.2% in South Africa compared to sub-Saharan countries, which is about 2%, and the world, globally, Europe, everywhere, they're only taking about 3.5% in terms of the percentage of the population. So there's a lot of pressure. And then combine that with the inequality, the poverty and unemployment, it does create, it gives you a toxic mix. So that's something that we need to be mindful of, that we do take up more than anyone else in the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade Kulelwa. And on that note, let me thank the panelists. Also, let me thank you two comrades for responding to that particular question, because we don't want to leave saying that questions are not responded to, but also the discourse around xenophobia as well. We don't want to leave it hanging in the air. Thank you so much, firstly, to the panel and to the discussants for taking your time to prepare and for responding to questions. Let me also thank the comrades who have contributed to questions that have been typed out, and those who have also given input basically from the floor, and also to those who have not basically given inputs, but to those who have been listening, comrades. We thank you for taking part in this particular dialogue. This is just but the start, comrades. I also want to take the opportunity, and it's very often that these comrades are not thanked in the public domain, but because they are not in elected leadership positions. But these are the comrades who are working tirelessly in Luthuli House, the staff of Luthuli House, for making these type of dialogues possible. The technical work, the content that has gone into this particular work, Comrade Spongy and his team of Comrade Rahmat, Comrade Obakeng. We also find Comrade Lau as well in that particular team. And if I've forgotten to mention any of the names of comrades, other names of comrades in that team of Luthuli House, I want to apologize profusely. But we thank you, comrades. It is your kind of effort behind the scenes that allows us, as those elected, as those in positions, to actually engage in these public platforms and to engage with the youth and with the membership of the African National Congress. Comrades, we want to encourage comrades, as we've said from the onset, to continue with these engagements in the branches, and also those comrades who will be part and parcel of the rebuilding of the ANC Youth League, to ensure that the rebuilding process is not only one that is mechanical around building branches, around going to Congress, but that these particular discussions and this particular debate and discussion and the critical engagement actually shapes and characterizes the rebuilding process, because it's not only what we need to revive the ANC, but to actually revive our society and to give direction to our society in the future. We thank you, comrades, and thank you for your presence, and our apologies that we have gone over time. Amandla.
too. Thank you also, Chairperson. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Comrade Love. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for great engagement.
Thank you, Comrade.